So my purpose for today is twofold. The first thing I want to do is just to review the behavior of firm on the perfect competition in the long run. That's something we didn't have the time to do last time. So I just want to introduce this. And then I want to move to monopolies. So I have prepared a problem set, and I will try to introduce the different concepts as we solve the question of the problem sets. So the problem set is available on Blackboard right now. There is also a Zoom version that enables you to take notes on it if you want to. All right, so that's pretty much it. Questions? Ready to start? Okay. You can use the chat to answer my question. Or you can just talk. That's fine with me. Okay, so let's move to the problem set on perfect competition. So last time we stopped at question 11, but I'm not going to answer question 11, 12, 13, 14, because I saw that you were able to answer this question on Piazza. So if you want the answer to those questions, just go on Piazza and look at students' answer. What I want to focus on now is the behavior of individual firm and of the industry in general in the long run. So to do that, let's move to question 15. And before we're going to solve this question, you must know that there are two conditions to attain an optimum in the long run for firms. So the first condition is that the firm is going to set the quantity, the optimal quantity, let's say QL in the long run, such that the price equals marginal costs. So this condition hold also in the short run. That's how we determine optimum quantity in the short run, but it's also going to hold in the long run. Why? Because it is simply deduced from profit maximization. Okay, so to get the optimal quantity, you want to behave according to your supply curve, which is your marginal cost curve. Okay, so that's the first condition. But in the long run, then there's a second condition, which is that the price will be equal to the minimum of the average total costs. Okay, so what does this condition mean? It means that any individual firm in the long run is going to make zero profit. Why? Because when you write down the profit for any individual firm, you can write it down as price minus ATC times Q. Okay, and so when price equals ATC, not necessarily the minimum ATC, but in general, when price equals ATC, this is zero, and therefore your profit is going to be zero. Okay, so if you want to find the equilibrium quantity in the long run, well, you must check where the marginal cost curve is going to intersect the average total cost curve. Okay, why? Because we want the quantity, the optimal quantity, to fulfill these two conditions. Okay, so now the question is, what is the dynamic of the market in the long run, which could explain that the price for the good will be the minimum average total cost? And to understand this dynamic, we're going to look at question 15. Okay, so question 15 says, so we have two graphs. The graphs on the left panel, I'm gonna use this. So this graph here depicts the behavior of any individual firm belonging to the market, okay? And the graph on the right-hand side, well, it's a supply and demand graph. So it depicts the behavior on the market. So that's the aggregate behavior. So the question says, after the increase in demand from D1 to D2, okay? So our initial equilibrium here is given by the intersection between D1 and S1. Okay, so our initial equilibrium here is in point A. And then we have an increase in demand from D1 to D2. So we have a positive shock in demand. So for some reason, I don't know, maybe people get richer and they want to buy more of the good. So the demand curve is gonna switch, is gonna shift to the right, okay? So this being a constant cost industry, what is likely to happen in the market? Okay, so I'm going to describe what is the dynamic in the market here. So initially, we are in equilibrium in point A here. Okay, so the price is P1. The total market quantity is Q1. Okay, so what is the total market quantity? Well, it's simply the number of firms, N, times the optimal quantity produced by any individual firm. So N times Q1, little q1, okay? Here, all the firms are producing the same quantity, little q1, because we made the assumption they all have the same costs. If they have the same cost function, then the optimal quantity will be the same for any firm, okay? So let's look at the panel, at panel A here. So for a price P1, what is the optimal quantity produced? Well, in the short run, the firm determines optimal quantity along its marginal cost curve. Okay, so you look at the intersection between P1 and the marginal cost curve. And so you will end up here. Okay, so in the short run, the firm is producing a quantity Q1 when the price is P1. Okay. So now we move to point B. So we have, let's put it in green. So our new demand curve is D2. But in the short run, remember, we make the assumption that the number of firms in the market is fixed, okay? So in the short run, there is no new entry in that market. So we remain on our old supply S1, okay? So in the short run, the new equilibrium is point B, okay? So when you have an increase in demand and the supply is kept fixed, well, the price goes up. So the price goes up to P2. So what happened for an individual firm when the price increased from P1 to P2? Well, the best response of any firm to this price increase is to increase its production from little q1 to little q2, okay? You have an increasing demand on the market. There's the same number of firms on the market. So each individual firm is going to increase its production, okay? So B here is the new equilibrium in the short run. But it's not an equilibrium in the long run. Why? If you look at the left panel here, you can see that when the price is P2, the firm is now making a profit, which is here P2 minus ATC times Q2, okay? So each individual firm is making a positive profit, which is the green area here, okay? So in the short run, firm can enjoy some positive profit. But what happened then? Well, then we are in the long run. So firms outside the market are going to observe that there are profit opportunities on that market. Firms are making profit, so they are willing to enter the market. So in the long run, because we have free entry and exit from the market, then the supply curve is able to shift. So new firms are going to enter the market, and the supply curve is going to shift from S1 to S2, okay? So which means that our new equilibrium on our supply and demand graph is going to be point C, okay? So point C will be our equilibrium in the long run. And between S1 and S2, what happened is the number of firms on the market increase. So increase in the number of firms. Okay. So now the question is, why is point C, why is this new intersection between D2 and S2 at a price P1? Okay. Well, simply because as firms enter the market, the price decreases. And so the profit made by each individual firm decreases. And so firms are going to enter the market when the profit on the market is zero, okay? So when the price reaches the average cost again. Okay, remember when price equals to the average total cost, the profit is zero. All right. So if we look at our options here, it says, option A says, supply will not shift and the market will settle in equilibrium at point B. Okay, so that's not true, because in the long run, you allow firms to enter and exit the market. So we know that firms are going to enter the market because there are positive profit opportunity on that market. Okay, so that's not correct. Supply will shift to S2 and the market will settle in equilibrium at point C. Okay, so that's what I've just explained. Firms are going to be attracted by that market, they are going to enter the market, and so the supply curve is going to shift to S2, okay? And this process will continue until there is positive profit opportunities on that market, okay? And in C, the profit is zero, so firms are not entering the market anymore. Okay, so it looks like B is our option. Let's check the other one. So C, supply will shift to S2 and the market will settle in equilibrium back at point A, okay? So, well, it's not possible to get back to point A. Why? Because our new demand is D2, okay? So our new demand is going to determine the new equilibrium. And option D says, supply will not shift and the market will settle in equilibrium at point A. Okay, so that's not possible either. In the long run, we allow firms to enter the market. Okay, so the answer here is B. Do you have a question on this? This is something very important. Okay, we must be able to find what is the optimal quantity in the market in the long run. And you must be able to understand the dynamic, this relationship between the individual behavior of the firm, as given by this graph here, and what will happen in the aggregate, so on the market. So what happened there? Okay. So again, you have an excess demand, the demand curve shifts. In the short run, each individual firm will increase the quantity produced as a response to the price increase, but the number of firms is kept fixed. In the long run, firms are going to enter the market, and that's going to push the price down until we are back to our initial equilibrium price, which is the minimum average total cost. Okay. All right. So this scenario was one scenario where we've made the assumption of constant cost case. What is this assumption? It simply says that when new firms enter the market, it's not going to have any impact on the cost curve of incumbent firms. So firms that are already on the market, their cost function, so their marginal cost curve and average total cost curve, are going to remain the same when new firms enter the market. In the next question here, we make the assumption of increasing cost. So what does it mean? So let me go through this scenario again. So here things will be a little bit different. So just as a reminder here, the supply curve of any firm in the long run is an horizontal line where price equals minimum average total cost. Okay, so that's the long run supply curve. Long run supply. All right. So here again, we start in point A. In point A, any individual firm is producing where marginal cost equals average cost, so at the intersection of both curves. And so each firm is producing a quantity Q1. Then assume that we have an increase in demand. So we move from demand D1 to demand D2. Okay, so in the short run, it's exactly the same. So in the short run, the firms that are already on the market are going to observe the new price P2, and they are going to adjust their production by increasing the quantity produced from Q1, little q1 to little q2. Okay, so in the short run, because we can't vary the number of firms on the market, we have this new temporary equilibrium here. I'm going to call it T. Okay, but then what happened in the long run? In the long run, we enable new firms to enter the market, which means that, again, our supply curve is going to shift to the right. Okay, so here the supply curve shifts to the right, and we move from our temporary equilibrium T to our final equilibrium point B here. So what is the difference with this graph and the previous scenario? So here in point B, the price is P3, while in the previous scenario, the price was P1. Okay, so what happened? Well, here, when new firms enter the market, there's something that happened on the market for inputs. Okay, in other words, because more firms are entering the market, they are hiring more workers and they are employing more capitals. And if there is some tension on the market for input factors, then it can increase the price of hiring someone or of using new capital. Okay, so because it becomes more expensive to hire people or to employ new capital, then the price, the cost is going to increase for all the firm. In other words, here we are going to move from a set of cost curve which was AC1 and MC1 to a new set of cost curve which are AC2 and MC2. Okay, so a new firm entering the market causes a tension on the market for input. So input price increases, which increases the cost for all the existing firm. Okay, so now the firm are deciding with this new two curve, MC2 and AC2, And so optimal quantity will be the intersection between AC2 and MC2, okay? And so because the cost increase for all the firm on the market, the price in the long run, P3, will be higher than in our previous scenario, okay? So what is the conclusion here? Here we have a long run supply on the market that's gonna be an increasing function of the quantity produced on the market, okay? In other words, when you increase the quantity produced on the market, the costs increase to all firms, and so the long run supply is going to be an increasing function of the quantity produced, okay? Okay, again, in the previous scenario, we assumed that the price for inputs were constant, and so our long run supply was an horizontal line at P1, okay? Because here in this new scenario, we assume that the price for inputs increase with the quantity produced, we end up with this increasing long run supply, okay? Do you have question on this? Okay, so the answer to question 16 here is that we are in an increasing cost industry. Okay. Questions? No questions. So I'm gonna move to monopolies now. So we move to another problem set. So there's a couple of things that I want to do regarding monopolies. So the first thing I want to do is to remind you about profit maximization in the case of monopolies. But then I will move to monopolies with price discrimination. Okay, so with the regular monopoly, we assume that the firm is going to charge a single price to all consumers, and when we allow for price discrimination, we allow the firm to charge different price to different consumer or to the same consumer. Okay, so we'll analyze different type of price discrimination. So price discrimination. And in particular, we are going to focus on perfect price discrimination, so perfect PD, market segmentation. I'm going to explain everything in a bit. And the third one is what we call two-part tariff. Two-part tariffs. Okay. The last thing that I want to do is to talk about natural monopoly. Okay. Why they arise and how to price when you have a natural monopoly. Okay. All right. Okay, so just a little summary about the monopolist equilibrium when we consider the simplest case. So the simplest case is where we authorize a monopolist to charge a single price. Okay, is going to charge the same price to everyone. So monopoly. So there is a couple of assumptions when we talk about a market with a monopoly. So what is a monopoly? Well, it's a market with only one seller. So a market with only one seller. Why is there only one seller on that market? Well, because there are what we call barriers to entry. And these barriers to entry can be of different nature. Okay, they can be technological barriers to entry, technological, or legal, okay? So usually when we mention technological barrier to entry, we refer to the case where the cost structure of the firm exhibits decreasing average total cost. And I'm going to come back to that later. When we talk about legal barriers to entry, we often refer to what we call a patent, okay? So basically, the government gives the right to a certain firm to have the exclusive, to be the exclusive supplier of a given good. Okay, it's often the case when you look at the pharmaceutical industry. When a firm discovers a new drug, then it can ask for a patent, and this patent enables that firm to be the exclusive seller of that drug for a certain number of years. Okay, so we have only one seller on the market, and that's the case because we have barriers to entry. So now, what will be the equilibrium in a monopoly market? So the first thing to observe is that because we have only one seller on the market, well, the seller is going to face the actual market demand, okay? So the seller on the market is going to face the decreasing market demand, okay? Remember, when we talk about perfect competition, any seller on the market was a price taker. So from the perspective of the seller, he was facing an horizontal demand curve at the level of the market price, okay? But in the aggregate, we still have our supply and demand equilibrium like this, okay? So here, because the firm is not a price taker anymore, the firm is going to be a price maker, then it faces the total market demand, okay? In other words, it's not going to face this, it's going to face the market demand, all right? Then there's another aspect, important aspect with monopolies. So these monopolies will have what we call the marginal revenue curve, which will be always below the demand curve, okay? Why? Because the monopolies will be able to determine the quantity or the price on the market, okay? In other words, either the monopolies would say, I'm gonna produce a quantity Q and sell at a price P, or you can say, well, I decide to set the price for my good at P and I'm going to sell Q, okay? So the monopolist is able to determine P and Q on the market. Assume that we are in equilibrium here. If the monopolist want to sell more on that market, then he will have to decrease the market price, okay? So assume that you want to sell Q prime, a quantity Q prime on the market, then it will have to decrease the price to P prime, okay? But by doing so, he decreases the price on all the units he's gonna sell. Okay, so he's selling more units, so it increases its total revenue, but all the units he's currently selling are now sold at a lower price. So that's going to decrease its total revenue, okay? And for that reason, the marginal revenue, so the additional revenue you get from selling one additional unit, will be always below the demand curve, okay? All right, so what is a monopolist equilibrium? So you have a demand curve, marginal revenue curve, and I'm gonna draw the marginal cost curve, okay? So the problem for a monopolist is a profit maximization problem as usual. So here, his problem is to determine optimal quantity Q that's going to maximize its profit. And its profit is total revenue minus total cost. Okay. So if we want to use calculus, then the optimal quantity Q will be determined by setting the marginal profit equal to 0. So you take the derivative of total revenue, by definition, that's marginal revenue. And you take the derivative of total cost, which is marginal cost. So in Optimum, we have marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay. In other words, the optimality condition for a monopolist is going to be the same as under perfect competition. Okay. So what is the difference then? So here we just said that the monopolist set a quantity Q star where marginal revenue intersect the marginal costs. The difference here is that the price set by the monopolist is not going to be the marginal cost, okay? So the price set is not going to be this. Why? Because the monopolist follow the demand curve, okay? So it's gonna set a price, the corresponding price on the demand curve. Okay, so that's, I'm gonna call it PM and QM. That's the optimal price for a monopolist, okay? So under perfect competition here, you would have price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost. When you have a monopolist, your price will be higher than your marginal revenue, but marginal revenue still remains equal to marginal cost. Okay, that's all of this same condition. If the marginal revenue is higher than the marginal cost, it means that the additional revenue you get from selling one additional unit is higher than the additional cost of producing that same unit. Okay, so you want to increase production. So the optimum will occur where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, but the price will be higher than the marginal cost. All right. So knowing that, we can move to our first question. So here we have a graph representing a monopolist. And the question are, what are the equilibrium price and quantity? Calculate the profit in Optimum. What would be the equilibrium price and quantity under perfect competition? And calculate the daily loss. All right. So how do we determine optimal price and quantity when you are given this kind of graph? Well, that's what we have done. So you look at the quantity where the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's our optimality condition, okay? So here, marginal revenue intersect marginal costs there, and that's going to determine optimal quantity, okay? So marginal revenue equals marginal cost imply that QM equals 8. So what is the equilibrium price? Well, you go up to the demand curve and you read that for that quantity, people are willing to pay 6.5, okay? So optimal price here is gonna be 6.5. Okay, so that was question A. All right. Calculate the profit in equilibrium. Okay. So what is the monopolist profit here? So for the profit, you always use the same formula, which is pi equals P minus ADC. So we are in optimum, PM minus ADC times QM. Okay, so PM is 6.5. So what is the average total cost of producing QM? Well, you look at the total cost, average total cost curve here. Okay, so the average total cost is going to be 4.55 here, 4.55, and you multiply by 8. Okay, so this is 1.95 times 8. So profit is equal to 15.6. Okay. All right. Okay, now let's move to question C. What would be the equilibrium price and quantity under perfect competition? Okay, so what would be the equilibrium under perfect competition? Under perfect competition, remember, optimal quantity is determined when price equals marginal cost. Okay, so here we're going to look at the intersection between the marginal cost curve and the demand curve. Okay, so where do they intersect? Well, here. Okay, so under perfect competition, price equals marginal cost, which is, so price is equal to, I believe it's 4. And the quantity is given by the intersection between the demand curve and the marginal cost curve. Okay, so quantity is 30. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna call it PC and QC. Do you have a question on this? All right. So question for you, what is a profit under perfect competition? Someone?
Zero.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, under perfect competition, you said P equals MC. Okay, so your profit is gonna be 0. Okay, why? Because you can see that the average total cost curve here crosses the marginal cost curve and the demand curve. Okay, so if we are on the average total cost curve, it means that the profit is 0. Okay, all right. Question D, calculate the deadweight loss. Okay, so what is the deadweight loss? So here we want to compare the equilibrium when we have a monopolist with the equilibrium under perfect competition. So we know that the equilibrium under perfect competition is the one that will maximize the social welfare, okay? That maximizes the total surplus. The equilibrium for a monopolist maximizes the profit of the monopolist, but it certainly doesn't maximize the social welfare or the total surplus. Why? Well, because the monopolist, let me just put QC here. The monopolist produces way less than what is produced on the perfect competition. Okay? And what does it mean? It means that these people here along the demand curve, they had a willingness to pay which was higher than the marginal cost of producing these units. Okay, so there were possible mutually beneficial trades here. And these trades don't happen with a monopolist. Okay, so the daily loss is a loss in surplus when you compare the situation of perfect competition with the one of a monopolist. Okay, so it's this triangle here. So what is the area of this triangle? So daily loss. Well, so that's the height of the triangle, which is 6.5 minus 2.5, multiplied by the base of the triangle, which is 13 minus 8. And because it's a triangle, you divide by 2. Okay, so if you compute this, you end up with 10. Okay. All right. So this question was about reminding you what are the equilibrium for a single price monopolist, what is the equilibrium under perfect competition, and to show that when we have a monopolist, well, total surplus is not maximized. Why? Because we have this deadweight loss, which is this green area here. Okay. All right, so let's move to question 2. So before we answer this question, I'm going to define what is monopoly power. So monopoly power is the ability for the monopolist to charge a price above the marginal cost. Okay, so the higher the difference between the price and the marginal cost, the higher the monopoly power. Okay, so here we want to relate the elasticity of the demand curve facing a firm and the monopoly power. So intuitively, I mean, to answer this question, you can draw a graph, okay? You can draw a very inelastic demand curve. Okay, I'm gonna put the marginal cost curve horizontal for simplicity. Okay. And you look here, so here you have the case of a relatively inelastic demand curve because the curve is relatively flat. And you can see that the difference between the price and the marginal cost is this, okay? It's this distance. All right. So now let's draw the case of a relatively elastic demand curve. Okay, so I keep the same marginal cost. And my demand curve will be relatively inelastic. Oh, sorry. So this is inelastic. And this is elastic. Okay. So here, again, optimal quantity is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and you charge along the demand curve. Okay. So here you can see that the price, when your demand is relatively inelastic, will be way higher than the marginal cost. Okay. Why? This is rather intuitive. The more the people are sensitive to change in price, the less the monopolists can charge a price higher than the marginal cost. Okay. But if people are relatively inelastic to change in price, then the monopolist can charge a very high price. It is not going to lose any demand. Okay, so what is the answer here? So when it is the less elastic, the greater the monopoly power. Okay, that's option A here. The less elastic the demand curve, the greater the ability for a monopolist to charge a price higher than the marginal costs. Okay. All right. Let's move to question 3. Bancroft Pharmaceutical has a patent on a new medication. All right. It is a monopoly. Marginal cost of producing is 10. And the elasticity of demand for the product is -3. What is the profit maximizing monopoly price for the patent drug? So to answer this question, you must use one formula that was introduced, I believe, 2 chapters ago, in a paragraph called Pricing with Monopoly Power, with Market Power. Okay, and this formula was marginal revenue is equal to P times 1 + 1 over epsilon. Okay, so you're going to use this formula to determine what will be the optimal price for this firm. So we know that in Optimum, for a monopolist, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Okay, so you're going to substitute marginal cost in this formula here. Okay, so marginal cost is going to be P 1 + 1 over epsilon. Okay, so what we are looking for here is the value of P. So basically we are given the value of the marginal cost, it's 10, and the value of the elasticity of demand, which is 3. So we have 10 equal P 1 + 1 over -3. Okay. So now you just put P, you just isolate P. So P equals 10 times okay, so this is 3/3 minus 1/3. Okay, so this is 2/3. Okay, so here you have 10 times 3 over 2. And so P star is going to be 15. Okay. So that's this formula, that's something you should know for the midterm. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's move to question 4 here. So before we move to price discrimination, if you want more practice on this, you can do the book problem 11.7. Again, if you need me to provide the solution for this, just ask me and I can post it on Piazza. All right. So now we're going to move to price discrimination, okay? So again, so far we assume that the monopolist was charging a uniform price to consumer, okay? All consumer would pay exactly the same price for 1 unit of a good. Now we will consider cases in which the monopolist can charge different price to either different consumers or to a different group of consumers, or even to charge different price for different quantity bought. So the first the first thing I want to do is to explain what are the rationale for price discrimination. So let's draw a graph. So I'm going to draw a typical graph for a monopolist. So decreasing demand, decreasing marginal revenue. And for simplicity, I keep the marginal cost constant. Okay. So I'm going to draw also the typical monopolist equilibrium. So without price discrimination, the monopolist sells QM and charge a price PM. Okay. And I'm going to put letters in the different area to make this easier. Okay, so that's going to be A, that's going to be B, and that's C. Okay. All right. So if you think, let's focus on the consumer surplus to start. So the consumer surplus, under perfect competition, what is it? Someone. Under perfect competition. Okay, let's start with the base case scenario. Okay, so
Isn't
yeah, the perfect competition, remember, you set price equals marginal cost. So your equilibrium is here. Okay. And so the consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. So under perfect competition, consumer surplus is A plus B plus C. Okay. So what is a consumer surplus under a non-discriminating monopolist? Well, as we said, now the monopolists produce QM, so the consumer surplus is again the area above the price and below the demand curve, so that's A. Okay, so when we move from perfect competition to a situation with a monopolist, there is a transfer of surplus from consumer to the monopolist. Okay, so what is the amount of this transfer? Okay, so again, under perfect competition, consumer surplus was A plus B plus C, and now for a monopolist, it's only A. Okay, so B plus C has been lost, but B goes to the monopolist. Okay. Okay. And in particular, B is a monopolist profit. How can we see that? Well, profit, remember, it's total revenue minus total cost. What is total revenue? Well, it's Q times P. Okay, so it's this whole area here. And what are total costs? Well, here, total cost, so marginal cost is constant. So if you multiply each marginal cost by Q, you get the total variable cost. Okay, so here, the profit net of fixed cost is the difference between total revenue here, minus variable cost, which are this area. Okay, so B here is the profit net of fixed cost. Okay. So from the monopolist perspective, there are opportunities to increase his profit further. Why? Because the monopolist profit, when it charges a single price, is B. But when you look at this graph, well, the monopolist could find a way to appropriate area A, which is the current consumer surplus. And if it could, it would also like to appropriate area C. Okay, so the question is, how can the monopolist determine price strategies that would enable him to get this additional surplus A and C? Okay, so you want to steal some surplus from consumer and you want to appropriate the area of the surplus corresponding to the daily loss. Okay, so we are going to look at three types of price discrimination. Three types of price discrimination. So perfect price discrimination, which is also called first degree price discrimination. Then we're going to look at market segmentation, which is also called third degree price discrimination. And the last strategy we're going to analyze is two-part pricing. Okay, so here I'm going to start with perfect price discrimination. Okay, so you must know a little bit about it because we covered it in ECO 1001. So what is perfect price discrimination? So let's use that same graph. The idea of perfect price discrimination is to charge. So first, you're going to assume that each consumer is going to buy at most 1 unit of the good. Okay. And then the monopolist would like to charge each individual consumer his willingness to pay for that good. Okay. In other words, let's assume that the first consumer here is willing to pay a certain price W here for the good. A way for the monopolist to capture all the surplus from that consumer is to charge an amount which is just below his willingness to pay. So if the monopolist is charging just below the demand curve here, then so that guy is going to pay like W minus epsilon minus something very small. And the monopolist's profit on that unit will be this W minus epsilon minus marginal costs. Okay, so what is left for the consumer? Well, only epsilon. So now imagine that the monopolist is able to do that with any consumer here. So he's going to charge the second consumer just a little bit below his willingness to pay, and again, it's going to capture all that consumer surplus and so on. Okay, so the monopolist is going to do that until it reaches marginal cost. Why? Because after that point here, well, marginal cost is above price. Okay, so it's no longer profitable for the monopolist to sell anything here. So with perfect price discrimination, the monopolist charge each consumer his willingness to pay. So each consumer has a 0 individual surplus, and the all surplus is appropriated by the monopolist. Okay. So if we look at question 4, when a firm charges each customer the maximum price that the customer is willing to pay the firm, engage in option D, first degree perfect price discrimination. Okay. So interestingly, now if you think about the monopolist profit in that case, what is it? Well, it's A plus B plus C. Okay, so perfect price discrimination is way better than charging a single price to customer. It enabled to increase profit from our initial profit, which was B, to A plus B plus C. Okay. I'm gonna add consumer surplus is 0. Okay. So what about total welfare? Social welfare. So social welfare, I don't know if you know that expression, but that's the same as total surplus. Okay, so what about social welfare here? Well, it's maximized, okay? So total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. That's 0 plus A plus B plus C, okay? And there's no way to further increase the social welfare, all right? Do you have a question on this?
Professor?
Yep.
The CS, that's equals 0, right? For the
yes, exactly.
Monopolist Profit, okay.
All right. So let's move to question 5. So we have a scenario with a monopolist. We are given the demand curve. We have the marginal costs. And the first question says, assume the firm charge a uniform price for its service. Okay, so when we say uniform price, we assume that we face a regular monopolist, okay? It charges a single price. So what would be basically optimal quantity, optimal price, and calculate consumer surplus? Okay, so let's do that. So here we are talking about a monopolist without price discrimination. Okay, so we know how to solve this kind of problem. You're gonna set marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, what is marginal revenue? Well, you're given the demand curve here. And remember, when you're given the demand curve and you must find the marginal revenue, you keep the intercept of that demand curve and you double the slope. Okay, so the marginal revenue is given by this equation. So marginal costs equal marginal revenue. So we have 10,000 minus 20Q equals 5Q. Okay, so 25Q equals 10,000 and QM equals 400. Okay. So that's the quantity produced without price discrimination. So now let's determine the price. So PM, so the price is given by the demand curve. So it's 10,000 minus 10 times 400. Okay. So PM equals 6,000. Okay. So what is a consumer surplus in that case? So we can draw a graph to help us calculate the consumer surplus. So we know that the demand curve crosses the y-axis at 10,000, okay? And we have the marginal cost curve, which is 5Q, so it passes through the origin. And we now know that this is 400 and that the price is 6,000. Okay, so what is a consumer surplus? Well, again, this is the area below the demand curve above the price. So consumer surplus is 10,000 minus 6,000 times the quantity, which is 400, and you divide by 2. So that's 4,000 times 200. So consumer surplus is 800K. Okay. All right. So that was the result without price discrimination. Now let's move to question B. So question B says, the firm can enforce first-degree price discrimination. What would be the lowest price it would charge, and how many units would it produce per time period? All right. So with perfect price discrimination, you have as many price as customers, okay? So here's the question is, who is the customers with the lowest willingness to pay? Well, we know that the firm is going to produce to sell its good as long as price is above the marginal cost. Okay, so the maximum quantity the firm is going to sell is given by the intersection between marginal cost and demand. Okay, so that's the quantity under price discrimination. What is the lowest price it could charge? Well, that would be the value of the price for that quantity here. Okay. So to find PD here, we just need to set marginal cost and the demand curve equal to each other. So B, so marginal cost equals P. So what was P? So we have 5Q equals 10,000 minus 10Q, which gave Q, the price discrimination is 6 point something. So we're gonna keep 666. Okay. So what is the price? Well, you substitute the value of Q in the demand curve equation. So the price is 10,000 minus 5 times 6. Okay. And you end up with this. Okay, so we have now this value here and the price. So what is the lowest price the monopolist is going to charge? Well, that would be 3,333. Okay. Lowest price charge. Okay. Next question. Ignoring any fixed cost, what is the total profit? Consumer surplus, and how much additional consumer surplus is captured by the switching from uniform price to first degree price discrimination. Okay, so what is the total profit here? Okay, so it asks
excuse
for,
me, Professor.
yes.
For the last one, for the formula, that was 10,000 minus the 5 times 666.
5 times, yeah.
That was the formula.
Yep.
So wouldn't that equal something else? Wouldn't that be?
Oh, maybe. Let me check.
I think it would be like 6,000 something.
Yeah, maybe there's a mistake. Let me check. Yep. Yeah, so that would be so that's not possible. So there's a mistake somewhere because the we know that the price here must be lower than the price charged by the monopolist. Okay, so there's a mistake somewhere. What is it? So that's okay. All right. Okay, so let's use this. So we have price equals marginal cost, which is 5Q. Okay, so that's 5 times 6. Let me check this. And that's this amount here. Okay. Yeah, so for some reason, maybe I don't know what I use. Maybe I use the marginal revenue equation instead of, I think it would be 10 times. Yes, I think I used the marginal revenue equation before. But you should, let me check, minus 10 times. Yes, exactly. Yes, so it was, okay, thank you. Yeah, I've used the marginal revenue equation. So PM was 10,000 minus 10 times. And you should find the same amount. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's the price. Sorry, with perfect price discrimination. Okay. So now let's calculate the profit. So the profit under perfect price discrimination is Q times what is the profit? Well, if you can look at the graph, and you know the profit is going to be, so the monopolist appropriates the old surplus, okay? So the profit on the perfect price discrimination is going to be this area here. Okay, so we only need to calculate this area. Okay, so that's QPD times 10,000 minus 3,330. Okay. times 1/2. All right. And you should find something like 3 million. Okay, you can check this. Okay. All right. So the question asks for total profit, consumer surplus. So, well, what is a consumer surplus in that case? Consumer surplus with perfect price discrimination is 0, okay? And how much additional consumer surplus is captured by switching from a uniform price strategy to first price discrimination? Well, remember, in the first question, we calculated the consumer surplus. It was 800K, and now it is 0. Okay, so the monopolist has been able to appropriate 800K of consumer surplus. All right. Okay. All right, so as usual, we are running out of time. Okay, so we will need to do an additional session. How much time do I need? Hold on. Yes, probably 1 hour 15. Okay. Yes, I know the stock market popped up today. So I'm gonna do another session. I don't know when I can schedule it. Maybe because you are attending this session, maybe you can tell me what are your availabilities. I mean, it's not mandatory to attend this session, but that would enable me to finish the problem set on monopolies and to start next Wednesday on imperfect competition, because imperfect competition is quite a dense chapter. So I will use the whole session for that, but we need to finish this. So what about so are you very busy in terms of your schedule? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, yeah. That's doable, definitely. Saturday or Sunday, okay. Let me think. All right. All right, what about Saturday around lunchtime? Okay, because we missed a session at the beginning of the semester. I had the flu. Maybe actually I had something more serious than the flu. Now I realize. So if you want to do 2:30, actually, yeah, 2:30 is probably better for me because my daughter is taking a nap at 2:30. So I won't be disturbed. Okay, so, all right. Yes, no, absolutely. I know everybody has different constraints and different availabilities. I'm asking you because you are attending right now. But this would be recorded, so no worries if you can't attend. But then it's easier for me if I have people in front of me asking questions and participating a little. Okay, so because I could also record myself going over the rest of the problem set.
Wait,
but
so when is the midterm?
So the midterm is in 2 weeks. So next Wednesday, we're going to cover imperfect competition. And that's a big topic. and the Wednesday after you have your second midterm. Okay. So
the second midterms will be covering just the chapters we have covered as of right now, not everything, right?
No, not everything. It's going to cover the chapter, starting with the chapter on costs to imperfect competition.
All right, no problem.
Okay. But the thing is, the rest of this problem set deals with problem that you've never encountered before. Okay, that's really intermediate micro material. So we really need to cover them. Okay, so okay, let's say Saturday at 2:30. If you can do it, that's great. If you can't, that's fine. You will get the video later. And in the meantime, I'll send you the solution of the last problem set. And that's pretty much it. So remember, you have homeworks due tonight. Okay. So I have a question here. Will the test be on Blackboard? Yes, it will. It will. I'm gonna give you more detail on that probably next week. Okay, like the first test. All right. Do you have other question? Nope. All right. So I'll see you Saturday, and in the meantime, stay healthy. Bye-bye, everyone.